There's also a generational shift that's happening underneath that too, which is Gen Z in particular, and even millennials tend to have more of a portfolio career, right? And in part, it's because they kind of need to, right? Think about it. Millennials came into the workforce in 2008, 2009 when we had the Great Recession. Gen Z is coming in at a time when there's been all kinds of chaos, and especially in tech layoffs and things like that too. And so both of them have been conditioned to not have a lot of faith and trust in their employers, maybe in the way that you and I did early on. Like, how do I control my own destiny type of approach? And that involves thinking through things like not what's there's the side gig. There's also what are things that I can do that gives me income when I'm not full-time employed. Portfolio is more like I've got a series of things I do. I've got my job, and maybe my job is full-time, but I also am on a nonprofit board, or I've got a crafts thing that I do on Saturdays at the farmer's market, right? There's just a wide range of things that people can do, some of which contribute income, some of which help them develop skills that might be make them more marketable as they go further. Requires that you have a learning mindset, right? Because it says you're willing to take risks and try new things and learn. And that one, by the way, a lot of people who are doing that are also increasingly the ones that can grab and use like generative AI tools to do it, right? What they're doing on those side gigs is they're learning skills that actually can be really valuable in either their current job or maybe the next job. And I think the portfolio of skills that you build longer term is going to be even more important than what's on the resume in terms of like what was your title at what company and what school did you go to and what degree did you get? Because like as an employer, increasingly I want to hire for skills and talent, right? As opposed to hiring simply for do they check the 5 boxes of how many years next.
Hi there, I'm Denise Chaffin, and I am your podcast host for Talking TA. And today I have with me Brian Elliott, who is the CEO of a company called Work Forward. And also, Brian has a newsletter. And Brian, does it come out weekly?
Comes out weekly, sometimes twice a week. I've been busy.
Yeah, you have. And that is also called Work Forward. In fact, I signed up for it today.
Fantastic.
We have three topics today that we're going to try to kind of maybe go from transition from one to the other. And it's going to be about some of your newsletters and great newsletters. So anybody who is interested, make sure that you look it up. Again, it's Work Forward and Brian Elliott. So Brian, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you and let you introduce yourself. Give us a little bit about your background, and then we can launch into our conversation.
Sure, Denise. Thanks. Great to be here with you. So, I'm CEO of Work Forward. I'm a future of work advisor for leaders and executives grappling with all the change that's around us, from workplace flexibility to generational shifts in how people work, to most importantly, technology and the role that technology is playing in our lives, especially the advent of generative AI. I spent 25 years actually as a practitioner. I've been startup CEO. I worked at Google and Slack running businesses, product and technology teams, but actually started off a think tank up in 2020 called Future Forum. And I've carried that work forward, understanding through both data, research about how people work, what makes teams effective, as well as case studies from a wide number of organizations that I've worked with over the past 5 years, as well as my 25 years of actually doing it myself. So that's a bit about me.
Yeah, great background. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And what was the think tank called again?
Think tank was called Future Forum.
Future Forum. I wonder if it seems like it's ringing a little bit of a bell.
Yeah, we did. We got a lot of press around a lot of our research on workplace flexibility back 2020 through 2023 or so. Every quarter, we did a survey of 10,000 office workers around the globe to understand what was working and what wasn't around remote and hybrid and in-office practices. So there's a wealth of knowledge on that one too that I'll chat about a little bit today as we go through this, undoubtedly.
You bet. So let's start there. Let's start with this RTO, the new acronym of the
Woo.
year.
Good grief.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. It's like I wonder, will it fade away into the sunset at some point, this acronym, or is it going to be sticking with us for a while?
I wish.
Me too.
It's kind of funny, this whole return to office thing. We're now it's you and I are sitting here today recording this on the advent of the 5-year anniversary of the start of the pandemic when everybody got shifted to working from home, right?
Right.
And yet we're 5 years still of discussion about does everybody need to be in the office 5 days a week, 9 to 5, to be monitored by their boss to be effective. So it's unfortunately, it seems to be a topic that's not going away anytime soon.
And honestly, on several podcasts already, it's become a topic, and we kind of roll in and out of this discussion, just depending on who the guest is and what their input is around it.
Yeah.
And one thing that I had read, it was an article, I think it was a Forbes article, but don't quote me on that, was that the companies that want people back to work want them back to work because of the empty office space. And but the as the office space leasing becomes, I guess, renewable, or companies are, as they renew their leases, may not. And so if the companies don't renew their leases, then it may open up hybrid and remote work again. Have you heard this?
Yeah, a couple things on that. First of all, there's actually really good reasons to get people together on a regular basis, and we can get into all the ways in which it's actually effectively done. The challenge though is there's a lot of reasons that aren't so great of why CEOs are pushing it. Real estate happens to be one of them, but it's actually not the majority, but it can be a contributor. It is a big deal in a couple of specific cases. Financial services happens to be one of those. If you look at Jamie Dimon, I think he actually is personally upset about this, and we can get into Jamie and all of his reasons. But the financial services industry writ large has a large amount of money at stake in commercial real estate. And regardless of all the headlines out there about people coming back into the office, the truth is over two-thirds of US based companies have some form of workplace flexibility. And that number didn't change last year. The number of firms that are going back 5 days a week increased. There are an offsetting number of companies almost that are sticking with 2 or 3 days a week or even a more employee choice type of model. And in fact, that commercial real estate business is kind of in trouble. The stats tend to get written about who's going back, but if you look at things like what's happening in terms of office occupancy, Q4 actually had the worst office vacancy rate ever in the history of the US. Office mortgage delinquency rates were at their peak ever. And that's because even firms that are going back 2 or 3 days a week are often cutting back on space. Look, offices can be really effective tools for teams. They can be really important, especially if your team is co-located, everybody sits in the same place. But you should treat it as a tool, not as the solution.
That's amazing. So what is the I mean, what do you think is gonna happen then, like, say, over the next 2 or 3 years?
So there's gonna be this lovely tug of war. So out of the like I work with a lot of companies that actually have taken a more flexible position, as well as helping some people who got a little too flexible and maybe some people who tried the mandate and it didn't really work out. But you can look at firms like Allstate and Atlassian and Zillow and Target. The list goes on of firms that have said, hey, look, we believe it is important to get people together, but we should let teams, not the CEO, figure out what that right rhythm is. So I'll give you a quick example. You've got folks who are a junior set of salespeople, meaning they're all fairly new to the job, they're new to the industry, they're all co-located in the same city. It probably makes sense for them to be together maybe 3 or even 4 days a week, right? Because they're going to learn from each other as much as they learn from their boss, to be honest. And there's probably some benefit to them because they also appreciate it from a socialization perspective. But if you've got a team of engineers and product managers that are spread out across multiple locations and time zones, insisting that they all come into an office 5 days a week is nonsensical. They look at you like, I don't think the reason you're telling me to do this is because you think it's better for me and the company. I think it's because you don't trust me, right? It's that loss of trust. So there's a range of companies out there, and what we're going to see over the next couple of years is this ongoing battle over sort of CEOs who have a command and control mindset that are using this to do a couple things. Maybe they're using it to refill offices because they have a real estate concern. Maybe they're doing it because they want some people to quit and not pay them severance. That's clearly true in the case of the federal government. Elon Musk and et cetera have said it out loud. But that group of CEOs is going to face competition against the two-thirds of CEOs who are saying, you go ahead and do that. Meanwhile, what I will do is I will cherry pick off your most talented people and bring them into my company instead.
Yeah, that is gonna happen, definitely.
Yeah. It is happening in some places already, so it's
Ugh.
kind of fun.
Well, and as the business kind of picks up again, because it's been kind of flat, as business picks up again, that is gonna happen. I mean, you hear it from candidates all the time. I interviewed a guy, 2, maybe 2, 3 weeks ago for an engineering manager position. He's in Texas. The position is in Indiana. He said, "The hiring manager is here in Texas. Why is he here and I'm gonna be in Indiana?" And so my thought is just having my conversation with this candidate, he may take the job because he's unemployed and he needs work. But the minute somebody contacts him with another opportunity, especially if it's a remote or hybrid opportunity that gets him back to Texas where he's from.
Yeah. There's some great by the way, the research around that too, like, if you give people flexibility, even a couple of days a week, it cuts the attrition rate by a third because people just have a little bit more ability to balance work in their lives. And the other thing is from all the years that you've been recruiting people, it's hard for people to pack up and move, right? Because you get to uproot your family and your connections and everything else. Like I actually worked at Slack in 2020 running a product and engineering team actually for several years before that. And we'd had the debate. Slack was an in-office company and culture. Most people don't think that because we're known for remote capable tools, but we were very in office prior to the pandemic. And we debated multiple times whether we would hire people in more locations because it was really hard to get people to move to San Francisco and New York and Vancouver. Um, the pandemic changed it because all of a sudden, 3 months into it, all of us looked around and said, hey, this is kind of working. And given that it's working for us and working well, why wouldn't we hire people in Idaho and North Carolina and Texas and Nebraska and not ask them to move and maybe get a little bit of compensation differential in our favor also because cost of living is that much lower. And there's just business advantage to doing it, it turns out.
There is. Now, what happened though after the pandemic? A lot of people who were working remote and they did set up some satellite facilities for them, right? So they could collaborate or at least have a place to go. Now they're wanting to shut those down and have these people then move back to the headquarters, right? And that's an issue. That's becoming a big issue. And there's going to be that great resignation again.
Yeah, I think if you're asking people to move to headquarters, Walmart has done this probably most famously. You're doing that with the understanding that a lot of people will quit and not take the move, right? Because that again, that uprooting a family is really hard. I talked to a couple Walmart employees. There's actually a couple of senior executives who quit Walmart. The Sam's Club CTO, Chief Technology Officer, is quite public about it. She said, "Hey, look, I'm not moving, and so therefore I'm out." So you lose talented people in it. Maybe you get people who are willing to move to Bentonville, but by and large, you're not. And so you do that with an understanding that you're going to shrink your workforce. Um, Dell is kind of interesting on this topic too, because Dell actually, Dell's progressively gotten less and less flexible over the past couple of years. They've done it at the same time they've done layoffs. So Dell actually had more layoffs in 2023 as a percentage of its employee base than any other big tech company. And it was right after their first round of layoffs that they said, hey, we know we said you can be flexible, but we really need you back in the office 3 days a week. And if you won't come to the office 3 days a week, you can't get promoted. And yeah. And what happened after that is interesting because about half their employees said, I'm not going to. I'm not coming in 3 days a week because the commute is too long. The childcare setup I'd have to pay for is too high, or I'd have to literally move to be close enough to an office to do it. And that's just too expensive. And honestly, both the odds of the promotion and the value of the promotion aren't worth it to me. So people didn't do it. And so they cranked it up again and they cranked it up again. And what's funny about this is prior to the pandemic, Dell executives testified in front of Congress about the value of hybrid work and remote work because they'd seen the value of it. So there's like literally congressional testimony from a Dell executive talking about this. So they're not they're not probably doing it because it didn't work. They're probably doing it for another reason, which is I can either do a layoff or I can make the requirements a bigger hurdle for you to jump and see if you're willing to do it.
Okay, I had not heard this before, that it's almost a layoff strategy to push the return to office.
Yeah, it is most definitely in a lot of cases. Look, if you're saying 3 days a week and you really believe it and your teams are co-located, meaning everybody's in the same place, it's probably not a layoff strategy, or it may not be a layoff strategy, right? It's a, "Hey, look, we think there's some value to this. We really want people to do it." Whether it's backed up with data or not is another entire discussion. But there's no research, and I've never seen an organization produce internal data either that says 5 days is somehow gonna be better. Matter of fact, all the data says 5 days is worse. What you lose is not just, like, productivity going down because people spend the time commuting as opposed to doing work. You also lose engagement with people. There's this great study from Gallup that tracked, like, employee engagement, right? Like, how much do I buy into my company? How much am I, like, engaged in doing it? For people who are hybrid or remote, it's much higher than 5 days a week in the office. And that changed after the pandemic. The reason it changed is people realized, all of us realized, like, I want to be with my team a couple days a week, but I really don't have to be there 5 days, right? There's no gain in it. So the ones that are doing this sort of soft layoff are the ones that are pushing for 5.
What if I told you there's one event that brings together the brightest minds in people leadership, workforce technology, and the future of work? We are proud to partner up with Transform 2025, the premier event where technology meets the diverse community shaping the workplace of tomorrow. March 17th through the 19th at Wynn Las Vegas. Join over 350 dynamic speakers, interactive small group discussions, and cutting-edge tech innovations, all designed to help you lead workplace transformation with confidence. But it's not just about learning, it's about connection. Build your network, exchange ideas, and challenge the status quo alongside progressive people leaders, workforce tech investors, and future of work entrepreneurs. Exclusive for Talking TA listeners. Get a special discounted rate when you register now. Visit talkingta.com to secure your spot today. Transform 2025, where the future of work happens. See ya in Vegas. You mentioned a while ago, I've been in this business a long time, and I remember in 2010, I was working as a contract recruiter for Intel. And I live in Central Phoenix, and their facilities are out in Chandler, which is between 45 minutes and an hour away from where I live. And so I would drive out there for this contract, and I love the team, but the people I was supporting were in California. So I didn't see any of the team that I was supporting. Outside of one guy who was doing the offers, I was doing the recruiting, and he would do the offers. So he's the only person I saw outside of the other recruiters and whatnot for occasional meetings. So I went to the talent acquisition director at the time and I said, okay, so I'm going to propose something here. This is in 2010. Okay. So what, 15 years ago, way before the pandemic. And I said, why don't I work from home? It's maybe at least 3 days a week, 4 days a week, because the time it takes me to get here, I could be like working. And he
Yes,
said, all right.
exactly.
He said, let's try it. And it worked great.
Here's a question. How much of your work too was across time zones? Were you
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go. It wasn't just that distance, like, you were displaced over time by from these folks too.
Exactly. And so I could work central time because during the summer, right? No, during the summer, we're Pacific time because I'm in Arizona. And during the winter, we're mountain time, because we don't change, right? So, yeah, so I was able to juggle then the time zone differences easier. So he agreed to it. Well, then a few other people started doing the same thing. And it actually worked out better because what we would do is we would come in on Mondays that we could have all of our meetings, strategize for the week, who's on first, who's on second, blah, blah, blah. And then even then, we didn't have to stay there the whole day. They just want everybody together. And it was kinda cool because then we could do that and then go back and get our work done, and it worked great. The only problem is that director got promoted to another division and left. Then they brought in a woman to replace him who had been with the company for a long time, and she reverted everybody back to return to office. So I left, and I started working for another company out in San Jose, California, because they were fine with remote work. But it's just I know. So
Yeah.
some of this reminds me This is not a new problem, right? It's a bigger problem because of the pandemic, but this has been going on for a long time, years and years.
I've led teams that are distributed, meaning people working in multiple cities for over 20 years, right? So I know what it's like to manage people who don't show up in the same office as me. For a lot of that time, they were showing up in offices. But I also learned the other lesson, which is salespeople. I never cared whether my sales team was in the office or not, except for the times when we had to be together, right? Like whether it was the weekly pipeline review or the quarterly planning session or a training thing, yeah, everybody should be together. But if you're external sales, knock your socks off, work from wherever is convenient for you, because I can actually measure your progress pretty easily. And I think that's one of the challenges that's facing us today is too many managers haven't been trained and too many leaders haven't figured out how to put in place results-based ways of managing people, right? How do I measure the outcomes you're creating? And how do I set goals for you that we can measure on a quarterly basis? And without that, they fall back into the weakest form of management, which is I'm going to manage you on the basis of whether or not you're showing up and your butt is sitting in a seat. And any kind of goal setting process, preferably one that's done on a quarterly basis, is going to be a hundred times better than monitoring your activity and thinking that just because you show up that you're actually doing work.
Oh my god. Well, and there are, I mean, especially with AI now, all the AI-backed tools that are out there are a number of different platforms that people can research and demo to find a solution that you're talking about that can help monitor and gauge some of the, I guess, what you call it, progress that people are making and
Yeah. Like there's like I worked at Google for a number of years. Google's famous for objectives and key results, right? Which is the company has like a cascading process under which it sets like here's the top 5 objectives within this business unit or function. Here's how that goes down to your team. Here's the things that you are working on and how they ladder up. Here's how we measure key results, like progress against that on a quarterly basis. And importantly, it does it through ways that are like 100 may not be the goal, right? Like we want people to strive, so 80 is good. Uh, Minor digression, but like that can be really helpful because then you're helping people understand what does good look like. If you're doing that, there's plenty of ways to do that poorly. There's plenty of ways to do that and that aren't really fantastic. But even just that conversation with your team that where you're all talking about what's the most important things for us to accomplish and how we're going to measure success is so much better than we fall into meetings throughout the course of our day and someone shows up. So someone shows up early and they stay late. So therefore they must be a hard worker. It's a much better way of managing and leading people as well.
so, Brian, I have a question, and I don't know if you've heard anything about this, but this keeps coming up for me. Is at what point are we going to isolate positions that are going to be targeted more for remote work or hybrid work versus those positions that really are it's critical for people to be on site, like manufacturing or healthcare, hospital jobs, things like even restaurants, you know. So at what point are we going to have so people can almost look when they're in school? I mean, if they might need to look farther ahead. What do I want to do? Do I want to go into a factory? I mean, am I going to be looking for remote work? And if so, what are those positions?
A couple things to think about. Like, first of all, most people don't want to be fully remote. That's kind of a misnomer. There's this whole thing about like it's completely in office or completely remote. Most people want something in the middle with their team on some regular basis. I don't know that it's going to be as much specific jobs. There clearly are things that are frontline where you have to be present in order to do the job for a period of time. And I'll give you an example of a company that I think has done this really well. Genentech, they're here in the Bay Area where I live. They're owned by Roche Pharmaceuticals. They have R&D workers who are in labs, right? You can't do biochemistry at home in your garage. At least you shouldn't do biochemistry at home. But those labs don't have to be in there. People who work in the lab don't have to be there 5 days a week either, right? Because they're doing analytics. So what they've figured out is like the senior scientist sets anchor days. The senior scientist in a lab says, hey, look, Tuesdays and Thursdays, everybody should be together because I'll hold office hours then. We'll review papers together. We'll go over stuff. And you all figure out what works for you outside of that. They have manufacturing plants and operations where people have to be there 5 days a week, but not all the time there either, because operations has oversight managers who might be able to be working remote on working from home on some planning activities that they do on a 1 day a week basis, as long as you have enough coverage. So it's like there's ways of thinking about it that have to do with like the job and the role. And so it's going to be this combination, I think, of like jobs that have specific requirements, as well as what people's personal preferences are that are going to come together to figure out what the right answer is.
So, as a recruiter, when I'm looking at hiring these people, right? And we are, again, looking at where are these people going to fit into an organization and those that are demanding remote and hybrid work. How do we escalate that up though to the business leaders? Let's go back there to say, hey, this is what's working for XYZ company for Genentech or whatnot. Why can't we have a similar process and be able to hire great talent who do want some flexibility? How do we like make that leadership, I guess, cycle? How do we convince them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. One is just I think you've got the data to be able to sit there and say, "Hey, look, if you're insisting on 5 days a week in the office for an accounting job that clearly does not need to be done 5 days a week in the office, I can get you this, I can get you 20 candidates on the basis of full time. I can get you 200 if you just allow them to work from home a couple of days a week, right?" And so thinking about like there's all kinds of data out there that sort of shows this time and again, the vast majority of people, something like 80%, want some form of flexibility, right? And most of those people don't want to be fully remote. Most of those people want something in the middle. There's also, by the way, Robert Half produces stats on this every quarter, and I happened to be looking at them yesterday. At the end of last year, you would think with all the hubbub and noise and headlines that remote only jobs or hybrid jobs would be declining. It's not true. There's actually more positions where people are looking for people that have hybrid or remote at the end of last year than there were at the beginning of last year because employers and recruiters who are employers who know that they need talented people. I'm sorry, you're not going to get someone who does data science to be in your office 5 days a week. If they don't wanna do it, they're not gonna do it, and they have choices, right? Will you get somebody who is, really hungry for a job because they've been unemployed for a year? Yeah, maybe. But if you're really looking for people that have specialized skills that are in demand, you're gonna have a hard time.
And as a recruiter, though, trying to funnel up that information though to those leaders can be a bit tricky, especially for big companies. I mean, your voice is heard at your management level, maybe director level, but then after that, who knows where that information is going. So again, there's that connection and communication with those leaders from the recruiting team. And I wonder, this is a good time, especially with our audience, to find out how much time are leaders spending with the recruiters and recruiting teams. Um, there was a client that I was working for, a huge semiconductor client, and they decided to bring in a big RPO and take over their recruiting function or their talent acquisition function. And so, but the recruiters and the recruiting team had no voice in it whatsoever. The decision was made at the higher level. Afterwards, there was some problems with it because the recruiters who had been there had been trained on how to hire or recruit and hire hard to find skills, niche positions, that type of thing. And now all of a sudden you've got this RPO comes in, they don't know anything about it, right? So, and I've heard that this story has played out more and more frequently over the last several years. So you kind of wonder, why aren't executives communicating with the recruiting team, since the recruiters are the front line for recruiting for their organization?
Yeah, I think it's because they are 2 separate. I mean, you would know this better than I would, I think, too. The executives themselves are 2 separate from the recruiting function because it sits a layer or 2 below them, right? They may deal with executive recruiting, at which point I guarantee you they have a handheld process, right? From an internal executive recruiter that's working with them, sometimes side by side with a firm, et cetera. But, the people that you have to get to are the people that are 2 layers below those executives, right? Which is the directors and the VPs who are sitting there saying who understand what's gonna happen in terms of the quality of candidates that are gonna get attracted when that kind of shift happens, right? So all these things, whether it's the shift to an RPO, or whether it's the shift to, no, I'm sorry, we're only going to take in-office candidates, is going to shrink the quality of the pool, at least, right? If not also the quantity of the pool of people that they get to see. And if you're a hiring manager, I don't look, if you're a good hiring manager, that's not the outcome you're looking for. It's a little bit back to A players hire A players, B players hire C's kind of thing. But if you've got a strong leader, they're going to want to have the best possible pool of talent that they can attract within some degree of constraints.
Oh, exactly. Again, I think it's gonna be important, though, for, talent acquisition to find a way to have their voice heard
Absolutely.
somewhere along the way.
Absolutely. And I look, I worked in tech for 25 years, which tends to binge and purge on recruiting, right? Like it's really hard in that space because having gone through the cycles, the first people to get hired when everything's going up are recruiters. The first people to get let go when things are going bad are the recruiters, right? And so there are some really wonderful people who are amazingly good at their jobs that have just been battered around by that process and those cycles, and it's just really hard. I feel for
Oh,
them.
yeah, the recruiting business can be, yeah, I always say it's not for the weak.
No,
Yeah,
no.
you need to have a
Strong constitution. Yeah.
strong constitution, yeah, and mental attitude. Oh my gosh,
Yeah, absolutely.
definitely. So, the fork in the road,
Yeah,
I'll let you start.
start that one. Fork in the road is the title of the email, the subject line of the email that Elon Musk sent when he took over Twitter. It's also the title of the email that got sent to approximately 2.3 million federal government workers about a month or so ago, right? And it was this sort of, in both cases, offer to people that they should consider quitting the job and they would get something in return for it, maybe. In the case of Twitter, because I had a front row seat, I've got some friends who worked there at the time. The offer was made, it wasn't actually followed through on. There are class action lawsuits against Elon because he didn't actually pay out, in it, and it caused a fair amount of chaos. In fact, if you Elon is quoted as saying it didn't really work the way that he had hoped it would, and he had to go back and try to rehire some people because they made some mistakes in terms of who they pushed out or got rid of. Now, here's the issue. Twitter going sideways and servers going down and it having a bumpy road for a couple of years is bad for Twitter. People suing Twitter is bad for Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter. This isn't Twitter, this is the federal government. And so what we're playing with now is the FAA, right? And airline safety. It is nuclear safety, where it's now, this all the stuff is in the press and it's been put out there about people that they pushed out, and it is destructive, I think, in a lot of ways. Look, I believe there's inefficiency and waste in government, absolutely. But if you're going to go after efficiency and waste, let me give you a quick analogy. As I've had to do this before, I've had to run layoffs and cut costs in firms because the economy went sideways on us or whatever else. But you start with the big pools of money. So, give you a real quick example. In 2001, dot-com bubble bursts, right? And we got to cut expenses. So we slashed the $2 million a month marketing budget down to $100,000 a month. We laid off the people in marketing who were associated with that spending. It was brutal and hard, but the company survived and got through it. In the federal government, the federal workforce, that 2.3 million people, is less than 2% of federal spending. Even if you cut 20% of them, which is what he's talking about, that's hard to do because 70% of the people in the federal workforce are military civilians. They are security, right? Think Department of Homeland Security, FBI, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to take 70% off the table to begin with. Cutting 20% is almost impossible. That's less than half a percent of the budget. This is not the way you go about getting efficiency. This is a way that you go about creating chaos. And I think it's going to be destructive. I know it's destructive already to people who are in the federal workforce. And I think all of us as citizens are going to pay the price.
Well, and I'm receiving resumes from people who are being affected, and I'm sure a lot of recruiters are.
Yeah,
So let's talk about that for a moment because we've got people all over the country now
that's
who
right.
are sending their resumes out. I mean, they're a lot. And so how are we going to integrate those people into civilian jobs or into corporate positions?
What's interesting is a lot of those people have been in corporate positions before, have actually been in private sector, right? There's a sizable chunk of them that are, for example, technical talent that said, "Hey, look, I believe enough in civil service that I will take the trade-off of lower compensation to go work for the federal government to help drive a modernization agenda." There was a thing called the US Digital Service where people have been laid off. Really fantastic, talented technical employees. There's a second really big group, which is veterans. So there's numbers this morning, 1,600 people laid off at the VA. Most of them are veterans, right? These are very talented operations people. When I was at Google, I actually ran a team that had a heavy physical operations aspect to it. I would say that 2/3 of the leadership of that group were former military, right? Because they know and understand logistics super well. They are great leaders. So I think we need to be careful not to paint this as, well, you've been in the public sector, are you capable in the private sector? If anything, these people are more capable in a lot of cases because they've had so little to work with. I mean, for all the demonization of it, the federal workforce as of a month or two ago was exactly the same size as it was in the 1950s. Okay? Think about that. This is you have to do so much to be effective, and the legal and regulatory stuff is so hard. I had a friend who actually had one of these jobs. He'd gone in and out of public sector, private sector. When he took the job, his boss said to him, "Make a list of the top 10 things that you want to accomplish over the next 2 years. Circle number 9. Assume that's all you can get done because Congress gets in the way, the regulations get in the way, all the rest of it. Now, how happy are you that you've taken this on?" Right? So these are people who are dedicated and hardworking. So I think there's just a massive opportunity to tap talented people. And you're absolutely right too. They're not all in DC, like
No, they're all over.
all over.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
all over the place.
they are. Okay, and another piece of that is I had a podcast episode with, I think her name is Melinda Gomez with Semi Foundation, and she runs the veteran program. And she had on the podcast, it's in our library, she had actually provided some really great resources for veterans. And also, she shared some information about some of the programs and how some companies can utilize these programs, and the government will pay for the training. I think it's maybe 6 months, but pay for the training for these people to come on board and kind of get them upskilled to whatever it is they need them to do. And so there's a lot of opportunity for manufacturing, for technical roles, like you said, engineering. So it's really quite amazing. So there are opportunities out there. We kind of need to, I think, maybe share that more now with so many people who are going to be reentering the job search market.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, completely agreed.
I'm kind of wondering too, how many of these people might be brought back? And I think another thing that might happen is because like you said, some of these programs are going to realize they need some of these people back. How many people are going to go back as employees though, or as contractors and go through contract houses?
Well, there's gonna be I'm sure there will be some degree of contracting just because there are services that are gonna falter without that, right? You have, by the way, members of Congress of both parties, they're now saying, "Hey, look, this is ridiculous. You can't cut this deep." And you're cutting into services that people need. I mean, the VA is a great case in point, right? Like cutting suicide hotline support for the veterans. This is ridiculous and it needs to stop. So I do imagine that some of those people will be asked back. If they can't be hired back, someone will have to turn to contractors to help with some of that to make it happen. I think there's a broader challenge though too, which is it's doing damage to the reputation of government service, right? And some of that is intentional. The Listen, numbers on this one I happen to know too. I'm a data geek if you haven't
I know,
figured it
I can
out.
tell. No, that's
I
fabulous.
am a great data geek. 30 people 30 and under. Less than 10% of the federal workforce is under the age of 30. Something like 35% is already at the age at which they could retire, right? On a full pension from the federal government. And so what's going to happen is you'll have some people who say, "You did your damage to me. I'm done, and I'm not coming back because I don't need that level of mistreatment, to be honest." And that is gonna go a long way towards making it harder for some of those folks. I'm very worried that it's gonna be harder to get younger people to step in and take this on because it's not like you get well paid. These are these are not people who are making tons of money doing this.
Well,
If you
not
got the
that,
opportunity.
but yeah, I think though there's gonna be a lot more on the contracting side. There's gonna be a lot more contracting that happens.
Yeah, which, by the way, is more expensive as a taxpayer, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Mhm.
It will cost the government a lot more money to bring contractors in to do the work than to hire the people and pay for their benefits.
Yeah.
Definitely.
By the way, when Twitter got sued, Elon Musk was on the hook. When the federal government gets sued for breaking contracts, Elon Musk isn't on the hook, we are.
Wow.
So, I mean, they're rightfully shrinking the size of the federal building footprint, right? There's been a wicked excess of space for forever and a day. But when they're doing that, there's penalties that come with closing those buildings. Those penalties are expensive, so it'll be paid somehow.
Oh, no, it will be. It will be because I mean the thing is at the end of the day you're going to have to get the work done that's not being done now as a result of this mass exodus, right? So I mean the contracting houses are like
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
and quite truthfully, I recall when I was in Washington, D.C. in 2019, they were talking about a good percentage of people were going to be leaving anyway between 2019 over the next 5 years, they said, which
Funny.
includes now, or actually we're past that point now, of people who are gonna be leaving due to, retirement. Yeah, just contractors who are done working and eligible for taking their either severance packages or retirement packages, whatever. So they were gonna be leaving, and it was gonna really kind of create a gap in the federal government for skilled workers in certain areas. So this is going back now 6 years ago, right, or five
Yeah.
and a half years ago that I heard this. And so now you take that and you couple it with this big layoff, and you just kind of wonder, where are we going to see the pain points first? And how are we going to address those from a hiring perspective? And I think, too, making that transition between the government side and the commercial side, how are we going to reskill people to bring them into some of the positions that we need? Because, I mean, we can really integrate these people, like you said, into other positions, right?
That's right.
And we
That's
keep
right.
talking about reskilling and upskilling and whatnot. So what is that gonna create for jobs for the recruiting industry? And that's something that I keep trying to promote because a lot of recruiters are afraid of losing their jobs. Hey, well, stick around because you guys, there's gonna be some new jobs opening up, right?
Given the amount of change going on in the economy, change is actually, I would think, good from a recruiter perspective
Yeah.
because you people that are in need of support and help, but you need new skills, new capabilities, and changes on that front.
And a lot of those programs are gonna be started up now and people are they're gonna need employees to help run them and facilitate them. So
That's right.
interesting
It's gonna
stuff.
be a while.
Yeah, so should we launch into "It's the Economy, Stupid"? I love the title.
We sorta have. I think the knock-on effect to some degree of all this from a federal perspective is also gonna hit employers in the private sector, right? So, you can see that already today. I had this conversation with some people on senior executives, and I've had this with board members in publicly traded companies too. Frontline workers are gonna be impacted by this, and if you have a company that employs frontline workers, there's an understandable nervousness now, right? You've got the combination of tariffs plus deportations of day laborers, right? So that hits farmers, that hits supply chains in the food industry, that hits construction, that hits restaurants. And it's already being seen. I'm in California. There's already been shortages of people showing up, like 75% drop in people showing up to work the farms. You start hitting that really hard, you then get into additional pressure on inflation, which is not good from a consumer spending perspective. So inflation's already starting to come back up again, right? Whether it's the bird flu issue with eggs, or whether it's the fear of tariffs. So compound those things together, inflation's not good from an economic perspective either. And then if you actually start making if the cuts that are being discussed also get made, they will have impact on employees. Some of that employers will feel indirectly, right? If your employee sits on a wait line for help from the IRS or the Social Security Administration for a really long time, that's on the employee, but the employer will feel it if they're not getting their VA benefits, as an example, right? Other places like that. And then if there are cuts to Medicaid and if there are cuts to Obamacare, which is also being discussed, then that will have a direct impact on a number of employers because many of them who have, for example, people working in retail in stores are often, unfortunately, dependent on the public insurance side of things. not their employer's insurance program. And so compound all that together, and I think a number of employers are getting increasingly concerned that while, yes, we would all love to have a more efficient government, the economy itself is not at the moment heading in the right direction, and the sheer amount of uncertainty and pressure being applied is not good from an economic perspective either.
Right. No, you're so right. And I hate to always end a podcast on a sour note. So you're always looking for, okay, what are the solutions? Let's look at what some of the solutions are, right? And again, I think that people are going to be looking at, instead of working for employers, maybe working for contracting houses that might be able to roll them from one project to another, where there might be a little more stability there. I'm kind of hearing a little bit about that now. And probably, I don't know, just some of the government or government jobs may reopen up again, and it'll give people an opportunity to get back into that. But what are you hearing as far as some solutions?
Also, you're also seeing, like, there's definitely, like, the rise in the gig economy and contracting broadly that people are able to do and that those firms will do well. There's also, look, for all of the concerns, there's also some degree of, like, optimism from a CEO perspective about, "Hey, look, maybe we actually do get a bit of a boost in the economy," which actually raises hiring in a lot of ways. And I do think that a lot of firms will realize that with the government pulling back on support, they're going to have to provide some more support to employees in order to keep people healthy and on the job, right? Because turnover, especially in the front line, is a really expensive proposition for companies, right? If you can't keep the store open long enough, if you can't restock shelves, if you can't pick in the fields, you have a major problem on your hand from a business perspective. And so employers will undoubtedly have to shoulder more of the burden to take care of employees. And maybe that's a good thing in some places and will be helpful for folks. But I think more of that burden will fall that way.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought up the gig economy, and I do see and hear that the gig economy could really take a surge, and there will be a lot more. In fact, I have people asking me in our industry in talent acquisition, because it has been such a roller coaster the last couple of years. Hey, maybe I, instead of going to work for a company, in fact, a colleague of mine, a good friend, he did just recently take a position as a contractor. First time he had done it. He's been working for corporate America his whole entire career, but he said, "Hey, how do I set up an LLC?" And so I helped him through the process because I have an LLC. So it, yeah. So there's these little steps you have to go through, but it's not a huge leap. And now he's working as a contractor, and he goes, "I actually like it." He said, "Because number one, I don't have to do the return to office thing because I'm not an
Yep,
employee. So there
that's right.
is more flexibility for me with respect to where I work and where I'm working from. Plus, I have my autonomy too. Yeah, you're not gonna get the raises, you're not gonna get, but this is kind of even if it's a transitionary kind of situation right now for people, at least it's there, and people need to kind of look at it and take the opportunity to look at becoming a contractor for a particular industry and whatnot. There are ways to do it and work around. There are some workarounds.
There's also a generational shift that's happening underneath that too, which is Gen Z in particular, and even millennials tend to have more of a portfolio career, right? And in part, it's because they kinda need to, right? Think about it. Millennials came into the workforce in 2008, 2009 when we had the Great Recession, and a lot of them first in, first out, right? They were last in, first out. They were the first ones pushed out the door when there was a downturn the last time around. Gen Z is coming in at a time when there's been all kinds of chaos, and especially in tech layoffs and things like that too. And so both of them have been conditioned to not have a lot of faith and trust in their employers, maybe in the way that you and I did early on. And so they're gonna wanna take a broader, like, "How do I control my own destiny?" type of approach, and that involves thinking through things like, not what's the there's the side gig, there's also what are things that I can do that gives me income when I'm not full-time employed, and there will be a rise in more people who are doing more and more of that as time goes on.
And you called it a portfolio career?
Yeah,
I like
think of
that
this.
term.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do. Instead of saying a job hopper.
Yeah, it's just well, there's a little bit of, like, job hopping, which is I go from employer to employer. Portfolio is more like I've got a series of things I do. I've got my job, and maybe my job is full-time, but I also am on a nonprofit board, or I have a podcast on the side, or I'm an Instagram influencer. I'm not an
Oh,
Instagram
there you go.
influencer.
That kinda okay,
But
alright.
yeah, like, but it's different things like that, right? That might be, or I've got a crafts thing that I do on Saturdays at the farmer's market. right? There's just a wide range of things that people can do, some of which contribute income, some of which help them develop skills that might be make them more marketable as they go further.
Okay, so that is a huge plus right now that you just shared.
That is.
It is a huge plus, a portfolio career. I have not heard that before, but I absolutely love it. And I think that we can hey, let's make that one go viral. I'm serious because quite truthfully, I think it would give people a huge sense of relief knowing that hey, I have more of a portfolio career. I am doing 2 or 3 different things and I can list them and I'm not alone. I'm not the only one doing it,
Exactly right.
right?
Exactly right.
And there are a lot of people doing that. I mean, and like you said, I think with the Gen Z and also the millennials, especially the millennials now are split into 2 groups though, right? Or is it Gen X? It's split into 2 groups.
No, millennials. I'm Gen X. There's so few of us.
Oh,
We're
okay, okay. Yeah, you guys are the original latchkey kids. I always remember
oh
that.
yeah, oh yeah. I was. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's funny. And then you've got the millennials and then some of them are called zillennials that are on the cusp of Z and millennials. But, I mean, they do. They have different goals. They have different work-life balance objectives, and they have a different attitude, and they will be the workforce as we move forward, right? So, I think that kind of embracing and saying, "Hey, it's okay to say you have a portfolio career." We had a big conversation a week ago, Brian Fink and Serge Boudreau and I, about job hopping and changing the name,
yeah.
and Brian coined the phrase "smart hopping."
There you go.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I think that if we kind of repackage some of what we've been doing that might have had kind of maybe not a real positive reflection, I mean, and move it forward and say, okay, it's okay. We can do this, especially with so many changes and so much going on with the government right now that we don't know how it's going to all play out yet. So yeah, I love having a positive spin on stuff. And so yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, like, the other thing to think about, that portfolio approach is also requires that you have a learning mindset, right?
Yes.
Because it says you're willing to take risks and try new things and learn. And that one, by the way, a lot of people who are doing that are also increasingly the ones that can grab and use like generative AI tools to do it, right? Whether that's for content creation or whether it's for helping you build your business plan. What they're doing on those side gigs is they're learning skills that actually can be really valuable in either their current job or maybe the next job. And so a portfolio approach also gives you skills. And I think the portfolio of skills that you build longer term is going to be even more important than what's on the resume in terms of like what was your title at what company and what school did you go to and what degree did you get? Because like as an employer, increasingly I want to hire for skills and talent, right? As opposed to hiring simply for do they check the 5 boxes of how many years doing X?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's fabulous. I remember, oh gosh, it was Medtronic I was working for, and we were working on a project. We were looking for some analog engineers for this particular group down in Southern California, and most of them had the digital background. Anyway, so we had to go back and try to find these people with these very unique skills, and most of them were baby boomers, people who had already retired, and somebody had brought them back as a contractor. But anyway, it got to the point where the hiring team was so desperate, they said, "All right, here's plan B. Why don't we go and try to find people, look at their hobbies on their resumes and see if they have robotics and see what
There you
type
go.
of." Yeah. So, I
Yeah,
mean, if you look at it even that far back, we
there you
kind
go.
of had that what else are they doing on the side?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is a good idea. Go ahead and list your hobbies. Go ahead and list some of the other things that you're involved with. I just love that. I think it's great.
And I think also as an individual, like if you've been displaced, right, which a lot of the back to government workers, they are being displaced, finding ways to sharpen up your skills, whether it's taking classes, whether it's training programs that you find, whether it's trying something out on your own, is all really beneficial because it helps you be more conversant in that. It's giving you skills and backgrounds, and it's helping you make connections.
It really is. I wonder how many people will go back to school too, who are getting caught in all of this. In fact, I was watching a TikTok video somebody had sent to me, and it was a woman, a recruiter, and she had the best TikTok video telling people when you are trying to fill gaps in, like if you have a gap, and employers have always been afraid of gaps on resumes. Go back and look at some of the things that you did, even as a volunteer or even around your home, or get creative, incorporate that kind of stuff, especially now with generative AI. You can put that stuff into AI and it will create a beautiful resume for you. There was a guy that I was helping a couple weeks ago, and he had a gap of about 10 years. But during that time, he had worked as a fitness coach, a volunteer fitness coach for one of the universities. So we added that on there. He had also done a whole lot with fencing and some construction stuff and machinery and equipment. So we added that on and it filled up his 10-year gap. But those were things that he was doing more as a volunteer or just part-time kind of stuff. But they still reflect what he was doing during that time.
Exactly, exactly. What you're doing is helping answer a question and scratch an itch. And maybe some of that stuff, especially these days, can be also like I think reskilling and upskilling is gonna be critical, especially with all the generative AI that's coming at us, right? But I do think it's gonna be incumbent on people to do it themselves for the most part. And like I am 57 years old myself. I've had to sort of bite the bullet and realize I'm gonna have to teach myself this stuff. This old dog needs some new tricks. And so I've actually signed up and done 2, like, courses that are with cohorts of people. One was with a group of people I sorta knew, one was a group of people I didn't know at all before, and, like, doing that kinda stuff helped me learn new skills and capabilities, and it's stuff that I carry with me and I now use on a regular basis. But I think you're gonna have to be willing to sort of put yourself out there, to be willing to go back to learning mode and being the student and not the teacher if you've been sort of a more senior person in an organization, and be comfortable sort of in that uncertainty for a while. But you'll learn something out of it, you'll get valuable skills out of it, and you might meet some cool people too while you're at it.
Oh, seriously. Well, that's how I started this podcast when work was slow a couple years ago. My producer, he was doing some work for one of our clients, and I said, "Wow, how come you can't do that for us?" And he goes, "Well, I can." He said, "So," he said, "Why not start a podcast?" And he's the one, I have to give him credit. He's the one that launched me into this bit. And I have had to be the student because I mean, there is so much more that I don't know than I do, but he's been helping me to incorporate what I do know into this new platform, right? So yeah, there's all sorts of new stuff we can do.
Absolutely,
And I
absolutely.
think too that the education piece of it, now when you mentioned that you had taken 2 courses, what were those courses? I mean, is it something you can share?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of them is a group called Almost Technical. The idea is it was actually started by a woman named Helen Cupp, who's an old friend of mine, actually co-author on my book. Helen started a group called Women Defining AI. If you put womendefiningai.com into your browser, you'll find it. The objective was close the gender gap on technology adoption. And so Almost Technical is the version that's available to anybody who wants to take the course, but it's basically like this immersive 3-week program. And what you do is every day you get an exercise. And the exercise might be 10 minutes, 15 minutes long, right? It's a little bit of like tutorial followed by like get your hands on the keyboard and play around with this stuff. And doing that not only on your own, but in a conversation with other people who are doing the same thing. You can ask questions, you can see what other people did, it's going to give you ideas and prompts. And then over the course of 3 weeks, you develop some basic skills. There's another one called FlexOS, and they do a very similar sort of program aimed a little bit at like managers and leaders inside of companies that are looking to build these skills. So these things are out there. And the ones I think are most effective are not go read this and do it. It's going to put you into a group. So there's a little bit of like, hey, keep up with the group that forces you to have a little discipline at doing the work.
But as new students, we don't feel so isolated if we're
That's
just
right.
trying to do it individually.
Yeah. And so like when you hit your head against the wall, which you will, and like, I don't get it. What am I doing wrong here? Right? Like, why is it not doing the thing I wanted to? Or why does every image that I get back have 6 fingers? We all hit these bumps, and so you wanna do it where you got some support. I think it's gonna be all of us to start learning these tools and figuring it out and sorting it out. You can do it for fun too, like, you can do it for, "Hey, look, I need a coach," right? It's actually really interesting on that front, like, you can ask it questions on everything from, like, work advice to fitness training and other things like that, and it'll give you some good answers. Sometimes its answers obviously are wrong also, so you always gotta check and see, but it's a really valuable set of tools and capabilities.
It really is. And I think that's something else we'll start seeing more of, our coaches. It's just I'm hearing more about it now. in our industry, and I'm sure in other industries as well. In fact, some of the people who are rolling out of the government stuff, look at yourselves as coaches. What can you teach? What have you learned that you can, help others with?
Yeah,
I think there's gonna
exactly.
be a lot there's gonna be a lot, I think, of forward thinking that's gonna happen now.
Yeah,
So, but
yeah.
yeah, but I love your newsletter, and your articles are fabulous. So thank you so, so much, Brian. I really appreciate
Glad
this.
glad to do it.
Yeah. Anything else you wanna share? You said almost technical, and then there was 2 others you mentioned. What was the other thing?
Almost technical, and then the other one is FlexOS, and really it's really those 2. And then, yeah, check you can find me on LinkedIn, so Brian Elliott, if you look me up, but also the newsletter is Work Forward, it's on Substack, so if you go to theworkforward.substack.com, you'll find it, or just look me up on LinkedIn, and I've got a little handy link that says, "Check out my newsletter."
Yeah, that's what I did. I went to your
Yeah.
handy link. Thank you so much, Brian. This has been a fabulous conversation.
Thanks, Denise.
And I think that we've uncovered a lot, and I think that we've also provided some great takeaways for people to kind of think about.
Go build that portfolio career.
That's right, that portfolio career.
Take it easy.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you.